Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is your go-to for accessible and relatable astrology designed to help you understand your inner workings and spiritual awakening. I'm your host, Natha Perkins.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is yet another week. We are looking at the week of July 8th through the 14th. But before we go into that, and we're talking about the Cancerian Shadow, I feel like every time I do the shadow episodes of these archetypes, they do really well. People always want to know what is hard about the archetype. And so we're going to talk about that today. If you're new to this podcast, season 5 is where I break down every zodiac sign while the sun is in that sign. So we go through 4 or 5 weeks of looking at all of the different facets of how these archetypes show up for you in your life in really predictable ways. But it is so interesting to dive in and get to look at it through this lens of, ooh, I do that, or ooh, yeah, I would like to change that, because that's the name of the game. Our days of just letting it go, staying stuck, staying in our own little bad habits and small-mindedness is coming to an end, hopefully. At least for you, if you're listening to this podcast, your mind is expanding, your relationship to your spiritual self is getting so much deeper. And you're just understanding who you are on a really powerful level. And we are all in this together. We are healing together by inquiring into our little idiosyncrasies, our traumas, our pains, our sufferings, and we're working at feeling better, feeling more connection with the world around us. If you like my style and you would like to book a private astrology reading, you can do that at electraastrology.com. I also offer mentorships. Maybe you are a healer or a practitioner of some sort, and you want to incorporate a little bit of basic astrology into your work with clients, or maybe you would like to become a professional astrologer. You can find out how to do all of that with me on electraastrology.com. And I'm releasing these on YouTube now. So if you're somebody that likes to watch or look at the charts, feel free to find me there at Electra Astrology. So let's talk about the Cancerian Shadow. Now, last week we talked about Cancer and the relationship to the physical body, the chest, the breasts, the stomach, the digestive system, and how it is so important to metabolize those emotions and allow them to flow on out so that they don't get stuck and stagnant. Before that, we talked about Cancer and Capricorn, the good mother, the powerful queen, and the trustworthy advisor. This week, we're talking about that Cancerian shadow. Emotions are very shadowy. Every single one of us has had multiple experiences where our emotions got the best of us. Something hurt our feelings, and we retaliated. Somebody didn't reciprocate love in the way that we expected, and we got mean about it. We withheld, got angry. Our feelings get hurt, we react, and we hurt somebody else. Because the archetype of Cancer is where we are attuning and we are sensing into energy, we have a knack of knowing exactly how to retaliate and exactly how to hurt somebody. So if we start with the archetype of the mother and we say, one of the bad habits, one of the shadow sides of mothering is giving to get. I'm going to have this child so that somebody loves me. And we start right there and we say, ooh, that's not really how it works, is it? But then we branch out and we say, you are my partner. You are supposed to love me. Or I have given you so much, and here's what you're not giving me in return. So we have to be careful when we are indulging in that Cancerian part of us that is giving to get. Giving of ourselves, our love, our nurturing, but with the expectation that somebody or something prove their love to us. That can be really problematic. And underneath our irritation about feeling unloved or feeling like everything that we do is unreciprocated is usually a sense of loneliness or a sense of not feeling important or of feeling rejected. One of the things that we have to do when we're looking at the Cancerian shadow is that we have to be really accountable. We have to know that when we get emotionally triggered and we go into that place of like, you aren't giving me the love that I expect after everything that I've done for you. You are not returning it in a way that feels good to me. Our job isn't to make somebody feel bad or to guilt trip them into behaving in a different way. Our main job is to go underneath that emotional trigger and figure out what's really there. When did the loneliness start? How did the rejection actually surface for me at a young age? Because we will find that anything that comes up as a response to something that somebody's not giving us enough of is going to be related back to our childhood. It is going to possibly be a dynamic that has been passed down our family line. So we might feel it, our mothers might have done it to us, our grandmothers might have done it to our mothers, etc. So we have to get really clear when we are feeling this rage around not feeling loved enough, not feeling like our efforts are appreciated. You have to get really clear that this is about us. It is not about the other person. The more honest that we can be, the more aware of our impact we are. So remember, like the Cancerian mother, the Cancerian queen, very impactful archetypes on others. There's a lot of control that a mother or a queen has on others. But we don't want people to love us because they're afraid that we're going to give them a guilt trip. We don't want other people to be swimming around us, scared to death of us snapping or of us losing our temper or of us feeling hurt. When we do feel hurt, it's so important that we aren't poisoning the water around us, Cancer being a water sign. One person in the group feeling pain, it's very easy for everybody in the group to take that on as their own. And many of us will take it on as our own with the thought that we caused the original pain of the original person. We can do the personal work that says, when I feel like I'm having an emotional reaction and I am experiencing pain, I'm going to make sure that other people aren't going to catch it downstream from me. So I'm not going to hold my love from them. I'm not going to punish them and make it their fault that I feel this way. So this is some deep and intricate work that the archetype of Cancer asks us to do. This is where we are taking full responsibility for our emotions, and we're using our emotions to help us get to the bottom of a situation. We're not using our emotions to manipulate other people to do things for us. And unfortunately, I think that that is a pretty common response for people. We get an emotional trigger, we feel lonely, we feel sad, we feel angry, we feel rejected, and then we make it somebody else's fault, or we make it somebody else's problem. And that's just not fair. That is not the sign of a good, safe mother, and it is not the sign of a trustworthy queen. So we are doing the personal work so that we are in full integrity. When we are having an emotional response, we are the ones that are taking care of it. We are going in, we are problem solving. We are allowing that emotion to flow. We aren't holding on to it. We aren't scorekeeping and punishing other people because we feel a certain way. And think about the people in your life that are very vindictive like that, and they do withhold love as punishment. They do things and say things with an intention of hurting somebody else. I mean, it's everywhere, unfortunately. Now, another version of the Cancerian shadow is when we don't take care of ourselves at all. We are giving, giving, giving. We're showing up. We're making sure that everybody has their needs met, but we are putting our own self-care on the back burner. We aren't feeding ourselves. We aren't taking alone time, and we end up stressed out and burned out and in a state of collapse. Now, think about your impact on other people when you do that, because here you are refusing to receive help that other people are offering, leading to you feeling burned out. And then what? Where does that leave everybody else having to tend to you again? What we want to do is we want to make sure that we are practicing receiving, that we are not always taking care of everybody else. And with this archetype of Cancer, we are going into retreat. We are going into our own little private spaces, our own beautiful homes, our beautiful bedrooms, our beautiful kitchens. And we are taking care of ourselves while also taking care of other people. And this is really important because A burned out mother is not really helpful to anybody, much less to herself. Another aspect of the shadow side is where we have difficulty actually feeling our own emotions. So that can come across as numbness. We aren't processing emotions. And like I talked about last week, when you don't process your emotions, then you end up having almost like a stagnant water. And stagnant water breeds things like mosquitoes, and it breeds things like algae. And all sorts of stuff starts to grow in the water that is stagnant. It begins to smell. So if you are having a difficulty processing your emotions or feeling your emotions, know that that is going to create a whole other problem. The emotional suppression eventually leads us into a place where nothing is good. We either build up a bunch of stress and explode, or we ruminate on our stress, get activated over and over again, or we hold on to our stress and score keep. Remember, Cancer is a cardinal sign, and the cardinal signs are the bosses of the zodiac. So Cancer rules by attuning to everybody else's needs. But if Cancer starts to get burned out, feels like nobody is attuning to their needs, refusing to feel, refusing to accept help, then that boss turns into one of those nightmares that we all talk about. The boss that is out of touch, out of tune, crabby, mean, and punitive. And nobody respects a boss like that. So this goes along with making your emotional state somebody else's fault. This is a real sticky one for most of us, where we have a grievance. Somebody has said something to us, somebody didn't return a call, we don't feel like we're getting enough attention, and it becomes the other person's fault. So we are basically refusing to take responsibility for our own emotions. And instead, we are just laying that big bag of you know what on somebody's doorstep. And we're saying, here, you deal with it. You make me feel better. There's some way that you're supposed to be responding to me or reacting to me that you're not doing. I'm suffering because of it. And I need for you to attune to me and make me feel better. And, that sounds so sticky, even as I'm saying it, doesn't it? We all have had those people that have made their emotions our fault, our responsibility. And then we end up scrambling around. Oh, let me please them. Let me do better. It's that proverbial needing to walk on eggshells around somebody else so that they don't get upset. And again, we don't enjoy being around people that we have to walk on eggshells around. We lose our own sense of identity because the whole structure of the situation turns into not upsetting them. And if any of you have had people like that in your life, you know how uncomfortable that is, and you know how draining it is. And you end up leaving situations with them with a huge emotional charge, not wanting to go back. So in a way, when we're acting out these shadow sides of Cancer, it's like these self-perpetuating problems. Nobody wants to be around me. I feel lonely. I feel rejected. Well, what was your personal responsibility in that? How did your emotions get the best of you to make somebody else not want to be around you? This is really tricky territory. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody likes to see themselves in the light of any of these shadows. And yet, Cancer is how we feel. And we will all very easily slip in and out of our own emotional stuff, sometimes several times in a day. The trick is being as emotionally aware as possible, so that when we do find ourselves slipping into projecting our emotions on somebody, score keeping, not practicing self-care, withdrawing our love because we don't feel like we've gotten what we wanted in return, when we find ourselves doing any of that, we can snap out of it really quickly and come back to our center, which is where we go into a state of retreat and we attune to ourselves. And we come to understand, like, what's really going on here? What's the bigger problem? It isn't because this person said this thing. It isn't because that person wasn't meeting me. This is deeper than that. And I want to understand it so that I can heal it, so that it doesn't keep popping up in all of my relationships. So another Cancerian shadow is withdrawing and hiding away, just taking ourselves up and out. This is an interesting one because sometimes the solution to feeling better is going to be in withdrawing. It's going to be spending some alone time where you are just with yourself, you're with your own thoughts, you're tuning into your own chest area, your stomach digestive area to get answers. Know that there's some differences in the way that things feel. When you are pulled away and there's this iciness, or there's this sense of like, I'll show them, I won't return their call, or I am cold shouldering them, that feels really different than I am taking some space and I need to be alone and I need to come back to myself. This is also part of the work, is that we come to understand the nuances in the way that things feel, and we kind of bust ourselves. We want to get really good at busting ourselves when we're pulling some sort of emotional trip on somebody, because with Cancer, it is so tempting to pull some sort of emotional trip on somebody. We want to be really careful when we're in some sort of conditional thing. I will give this to you. I want this in return. I gave this to you. Here's how I expect for you to meet me. I am going to intentionally misinterpret this so that you know that you messed something up, right? I mean, the archetype of Cancer is a very sticky, tricky archetype because emotions are so strong and they come on so suddenly, and we really do feel them very deeply. Sometimes it can be hard to come back out of that, oh, what feels like the hit to your chest or the pit in your stomach. It can feel really hard to get over that. Think about when you've had a fight with somebody and you just cannot make yourself go to talk to them. You cannot make yourself go to repair or apologize. Give yourself time. Cancer is where we have to allow things to flow. But just like bath water, sometimes you have to let the cold water run a bit until the hot water comes in. So know that if you're feeling emotionally cold and cold water is coming out of your proverbial tap, that's okay. You're allowed to let it flow and you're allowed to sit with it and give it time and space. And eventually that warm water will start to come out again. But the big key is in the self-awareness. It is in the being able to see when you are acting out and then making strides, making gestures to repair when needed, apologize when needed, or even just open up a line of authentic communication. All right, well, let's talk about the astrology of the week. All right, so we are starting this week still fresh off of the energy of that new moon in the sign of Cancer at 14 degrees. Remember that it was opposing Ceres. So if you had downloads, if you had connections that you made through the body about emotional flow and where you might be blocked emotionally, where you want some more emotional attunement from yourself, don't lose sight of those, because we have Jupiter coming in with a sextile and a trine to the nodes. Remember last week we had the sun squaring the nodes. So the nodes are always bringing in these questions of personal growth, of mission and purpose. And as Jupiter makes this harmonious connection, there's something very expansive on the horizon. There's something that is very exciting that is coming in for you to better understand. So just be open for that, and knowing that the more you're listening to your physical body, the less of your mental chatter, the less of the distracting version of your mental chatter. You're still using your mind, but you're not allowing yourself to get so distracted by what's out there. The more in alignment you'll become. We still have Neptune and Saturn in Pisces. They're both in retrograde motion now. So we're being very mindful and discerning of what we allow into our field of awareness, while trying not to get all riled up about things that are going on in the news, things that are designed specifically to throw us into emotional reactivity. So as we're moving through Cancer season, we're learning a lot about emotional reactivity and how certain things will throw us instantly into some old pattern of this isn't right, this should be different, I'm wanting it to be different. I'm worrying about it and I'm wondering what's going to happen. Those are the things that tee us off that we are on the wrong track. And this is where we come back into our retreat, into our safe space, and we just allow whatever those emotional triggers were to flow on through so that we create the space for the interesting, exciting things that are trying to manifest in our lives. We have the sun coming into a trine with Pluto on July 10th. This is also in a trine to the moon, in a trine to Juno. So this is really nice energy. This is like, we can relax. We can just accept that everything is flowing in the right way. The right details are getting taken care of. The right structures are being put into place. This is also Venus at the 29th degree of Cancer. So Venus is getting ready to head into the sign of Leo. That will happen on July 11th. Remember, Venus was in Leo last summer for Venus retrograde in Leo. So whatever it was that last summer was about for you, this is a revisit. There were a lot of discoveries last year in terms of your value system and in terms of you being connected to the things that really light you up and bring you a sense of excitement and just happiness. Venus in the sign of Leo reminds us like it doesn't have to be so heavy. It doesn't have to, our joy doesn't have to come at the expense of something else. Our beauty is not dependent on whether we're saying the right things and wearing the right clothes. There's ways to have a lot of fun with money that don't involve spending it to impress people. These are the lessons that Venus in Leo teaches us. Now, that said, very quickly, after Venus moves into Leo, it makes an opposition to Pluto. So this is where you're going to be asked to look at stories that you have around Venus things. Where did you learn that you weren't valuable unless you looked a certain way? Where did you learn that you weren't worthy of being listened to if you weren't a beautiful specimen of a person? Where did you learn that unless you made a certain amount of money and drove a fancy car, that nobody was going to take you seriously? Where did you learn that relationships were painful, right? Because Pluto brings us into the awareness. Pluto pushes the growth. And Venus in Leo wants us to grow. We're trying to access more joy. We're trying to access things that feel better. But in the same way that you can't put frosting on cardboard and call it a cake, you can't just joy your way into healing. In order to heal, you have to really understand what was there that was causing the pain, that was causing the wound in the first place. Now, the final aspect that I want to talk about is happening on the 12th, same day that Venus is opposing Pluto, and that is Vesta at 10 degrees of Leo, making a sextile trine to the nodes. Vesta is the principle of focus. It asks us to go in and sit with something in the same way that we would tend to a campfire. You have to keep putting logs on. You have to make sure that the sparks aren't flying around catching fire. Fires take a considerable amount of tending. Vesta is reminding us of these divine assignments that we are all being given. We have a true north. And although we might not be completely clear on what that is, every time that these planets and these asteroids make these connections with the nodes in the sky, it's helping us to get a little bit more clear about where it is that we are meant to be heading. The game has changed. The version of you that was doing your thing in 2020 has been course corrected. You are now into new things, heading in a new direction, in a new timeline. And although it has taken several years since then to get oriented, and we're still trying to figure out what's happening, there are more and more pieces of the puzzle that are being revealed. Next week, join me. We're going to be talking about the gifts of the Cancerian archetype. And there are so many. This is such a beautiful energy that we're working with. So this week, spend some time tuning in to how your own Cancerian shadow shows up for you and work at changing the parts that you know are no longer serving you. All right, I'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for spending time with me. You can find me all over the internet or at electroastrology.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with your friends and help them discover us. And if you are the kind of person who likes to leave reviews, I'd greatly appreciate it.